The skies above Ploesti, Romania, had become a crucible. It was a hell of flak and fire. American airmen fought there to cripple the Nazi war machine. For many, the desperate abandon ship order was just the beginning. They plummeted from crippled B-24. They traded the roaring inferno of aerial combat for the terrifying silence of freefall. They landed amidst the rugged, unfamiliar terrain of Nazi-occupied Yugoslavia. Here, their fight for survival shifted. It moved from the cold, thin air to the equally perilous ground. Every shadow could hide an enemy there. Every rustle in the bushes could signal discovery. The airmen found themselves in a land gripped by pervasive fear and danger. Yugoslavia was a nation that had dared to defy Hitler. A coup d'etat in March of 1941 had triggered brutal punishment. The unmerciful bombing of Belgrade on April 6, 1941, laid waste to the capital. It left thousands dead. The country was under a merciless occupation. This was the grim reality into which the American flyers descended. German forces enforced a brutal regime. The Gestapo hunted down anyone with Allied connections. Escape was not merely difficult. It was a labyrinth of bureaucratic hurdles and constant, lethal threats. For the downed airmen, the initial vulnerability was profound. They were injured and disoriented. Far from their familiar world of advanced machinery, they were suddenly dependent on the kindness of strangers. Their ordeal began with a harrowing game of evasion. They constantly moved from one simple stone and thatch village to another. They were always ducking into bushes to avoid German patrols. Tired, hungry, and uncertain of their fate, they subsisted on meager rations. These included goat's milk and stale hay bread. They often worried about the burden they placed on their poor Serbian hosts. From January of 1944, a growing number of airmen arrived. Sometimes a dozen or more daily, they were assembled in remote villages. They were trapped in a state of limbo. They had escaped capture only to feel lost and forgotten. Into this volatile landscape, the Serbian resistance emerged. It was led by General Draza Mihailovich and his Chetniks. These were men forged by the trauma of World War I. That conflict had seen Serbia lose a quarter of its male population. Mihailovich's strategy was shaped by this history. He prioritized avoiding premature, large-scale confrontations. Such actions would invite catastrophic German reprisals. He knew Hitler's draconian order. 100 Serbs shot for every German soldier killed, the order stated. 50 for every wounded. This stark reality underscored the immense courage and humanitarianism of Serbian villagers and Mihailovich's Chetniks. They sheltered the airmen despite these immense risks. They defied German occupation. They offered food, drink, and shelter to strangers. They knew that 20 villagers could be taken prisoner for harboring Americans. Their actions were a profound act of defiance. It was a quiet, unwavering resistance against overwhelming odds. The war in Yugoslavia was not a simple binary of Allied versus Axis. Beneath the surface of German occupation, a brutal civil war festered. It was born from generations of ethnic and religious divisions. Pre-war Yugoslavia, under King Alexander's absolute rule, had already been a tinderbox. Serb and Croat animosities simmered there. The trauma of World War I, which had bled Serbia of a quarter of its male population, haunted General Draza Mihailovich. His strategy for resistance was rooted in this memory. He sought to avoid premature, large-scale confrontations. Such actions would invite catastrophic German reprisals. He had consistently refused German offers of cooperation. He famously declared, "As long as you are shooting and arresting innocent Serbians, and as long as you are in our homeland, there can be no negotiations of any kind." As Lieutenant Colonel Zivana Nakanezovic would later explain, Mihailovich's rationale was simple. He wanted to prevent the annihilation of his people, yet this calculated patience was misunderstood. Perhaps it was deliberately twisted by Allied commands. They grappled with a growing web of disinformation. Confusion reigned. British Special Operations Executive Agent Captain Dwayne Hudson, for instance, reported alleged collaboration. He also reported Mihailovich's passive stance in May of 1942. However, accommodations with Axis forces by Mihailovich's men were often pragmatic survival tactics. They were not ideological alignment. Mihailovich himself tried to counter the rising tide of falsehoods. He sent telegrams in February and March of 1943. These detailed communist terror and massacres. He accused Tito's partisans of abandoning civilians to the Germans. He even suspected an intrigue on the part of the Germans and the Italians directed against the national movement. This was fueled by the campaign which is being waged in the Allied countries against the national movement. The genesis of this Allied betrayal lay in shifting geopolitical sands. The German invasion of the Soviet Union in June of 1941 galvanized Josip Broz Tito. He was a dedicated Croat and chairman of the outlawed Yugoslav Communist Party. Tito's partisans, fueled by Soviet ideology, launched aggressive, all-out resistance. This provoked brutal reprisals. However, it presented a more visible, albeit brutal, challenge to the occupiers. This visibility was amplified by Soviet agents. Most notably, James Klugman worked within British intelligence. Klugman, a confirmed Soviet mole, became the principal architect of sabotaging Mihailovich's supply operations and promoting Tito. His commanding officer Basil Davidson would later call this the Klugman period. These actions actively discredited Mihailovich and warped Allied perceptions. Further clouding the waters were reports from Allied liaisons. Randolph Churchill, Winston Churchill's son, was Tito's principal British liaison. His biased accounts exacerbated British frustration with Mihailovich's perceived defiance. By June of 1943, the British Middle East Command issued an operational decision. It ordered Mihailovich to submit to Tito. This ultimatum was a crucial turning point. It effectively sealed the fate of the Yugoslav monarchy. It paved the way for a communist Yugoslavia. The final, devastating blow came at the Tehran Conference in December of 1943. There, Allied leaders Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill met. They were driven by the pragmatic priority of supporting who was killing the most Germans. They formally sidelined Mihailovich. Despite Churchill's earlier willingness to make a favorable reference to the devil if it meant defeating Hitler, the decision was made. It ultimately led to the tragic irony of the Allies supporting a communist regime they had previously opposed. Amidst this political quagmire, a new kind of warfare was taking shape. It was born from the glaring intelligence failures of Pearl Harbor. President Roosevelt had created the Office of Strategic Services in June of 1942. He placed Wild Bill Donovan at its head. Donovan's recruitment philosophy was as unconventional as the agency itself. He sought out calculatingly reckless young men and women. He prioritized strength of character over traditional motions of espionage. His pragmatism even extended to ideology. When a congressman questioned the presence of a young Communist League operative in the OSS, Donovan famously retorted. He said, "For the job he's doing in Italy, he's on the honor roll of OSS. Mission success, not ideological purity, was the guiding principle." One such recruit, George Vujnovic, embodied this spirit. His personal connection to Yugoslavia was profound. Having escaped Nazi occupation himself, it instilled in him a unique drive and empathy for stranded airmen. This empathy was ignited by a letter from his wife, Mirjana Vujnovic, in Washington, D.C. She asked, "Are you involved in trying to get them out?" Her poignant question served as the critical catalyst. It triggered George's investigation. It exposed the urgent need for rescue that official channels had ignored. Clandestine OSS operations began to infiltrate Yugoslavia. It was a dangerous world. Agents blended inconspicuously into foreign locales. They gathered information and created mayhem behind enemy lines. George Masulin, a robust former steelworker, was among those dropped into enemy territory. He was the heaviest American to parachute in World War II. He was tasked with establishing contact and creating safe zones amidst enemy territory. The OSS presence in Yugoslavia would eventually grow to 40 agents by October of 1944. This was a testament to the agency's bold, unconventional approach to intelligence. The urgent need for rescue was undeniable. Hundreds of American airmen were stranded in Mihailovich's territory. Many were half-starved fighting animals for food. Others were discovered by Germans despite being hidden in convents. Their families received only agonizing missing-in-action telegrams. Despite being notified by the Yugoslav ambassador, Konstantin Fotic, the American War Department and British Supreme Command either failed to respond or delayed action. They recorded the information but planned no rescue. Frustrated by these delays and the insanely political maneuvering, OSS Chief Donovan decided to bypass the bureaucracy. On July 4, 1944, he sent a letter to President Roosevelt. He framed the rescue as an opportunity to establish a clandestine intelligence team in Yugoslavia. He urged swift action before our colleagues may not take advantage of our present position. In a pivotal personal conversation that followed, Donovan delivered a blunt appeal to the president. "Screw the British," he said. "Let's get our boys out." Roosevelt immediately agreed. His decisive directive provided the critical presidential approval for an all-American rescue effort. The fate of hundreds of airmen, caught between warring factions and political expediency, now rested on the daring and ingenuity of the OSS. The presidential directive had cut through the bureaucratic fog. It gave birth to the Aircrew Rescue Unit on July 14, 1944. This specialized OSS capability was America's answer to the growing humanitarian crisis in Yugoslavia. It was a bold gamble to retrieve hundreds of downed airmen. Yet, even with Roosevelt's blessing, the mission was not free of the political quicksand that defined wartime Yugoslavia. British objections, fueled by a deep-seated mistrust of Mihailovich, forced a critical change in leadership. A growing allegiance to Tito also played a role. Winston Churchill himself, the former naval person, would not countenance George Vujanovic leading the charge. Vujanovic was a man with deep Serbian ties and fierce loyalty. He would be leading into Mihailovich's territory. Vujanovic, though disappointed, understood the stakes. "George, they're not going to let me go," he told Mussolini. "You'll lead the mission." George Mussolini stepped forward with a big smile piercing the bushy black beard. His prior experience parachuting into Yugoslavia had forged him into a formidable OSS operative. He was a natural choice. Mussolini was fluent in Serbo-Croat. He was intimately familiar with the treacherous terrain and the complex loyalties of the region. Alongside him, Sergeant Mike Rajakic, a fellow Yugoslav American, joined. Radioman Arthur Jibilian, known affectionately as Jibby, completed the three-man infiltration team. Jibilian was a veteran of the harrowing Mission Columbia. There, he had narrowly escaped death after 5 days fleeing German pursuit. He brought a hard-won resilience to the team. His transformation from a novice to a seasoned agent made him uniquely suited for the perilous task ahead. He felt almost expendable after his personal traumas. The challenge was immense. Hundreds of airmen, far more than anticipated, required a makeshift airstrip and perilous night landings. It was a logistical nightmare requiring ingenuity and unwavering courage. In the remote farmhouses of Pranjani, the airmen had taken matters into their own hands. They were weeks and months into their desperate wait. Marooned and forgotten, their dire situation was compounded by the silence from Allied command. This compelled them to take an immense risk. They decided to broadcast an SOS. They salvaged radio parts from crashed bombers, piecing together a lifeline. Airman Oliver, whose bomber was aptly named Fighting Mudcat, meticulously developed unique authentication codes. These included Banana Nose, referring to Sam Benigno and his white scarf. They also used the name Munn, Chief Lug, who was commander of the 459th Bomb Group. The distinctive 15th Air Force emblem with a red fist was another key. These were the keys to proving their identity and preventing a German trap. Taking a deep breath, the operator tapped out a desperate message to COAPO 520. This was at the 15th Air Force Base in Bari. Head, he transmitted. So, 150 members of American crew have been waiting for rescue. There are many sick and wounded. Call back. So, Hess. Mudcat driver to COAPO 520. 150 Yanks are in Yugo, some sick. Shoot us workhorses. Miles away in Bari, an intelligence officer of the 15th Air Force first picked up the crackling Morse code. He found the string of numbers initially meaningless. It was a jumble of static and indecipherable data. For 2 agonizing hours, he struggled to pinpoint the caller's location. The weight of 100+ lives hung in the balance. Then, Major Christie, commander of the 459th Bomber Group, stepped in. He stared at the cryptic string of numbers and letters. It was a puzzle that had baffled intelligence officers for hours. The airwaves crackled with static. but the sheer audacity of the message, the raw plea for help, embedded in its carefully constructed code, had been undeniable. Suddenly, a spark of recognition. After hours of intense focus, a eureka moment occurred. "That's Oliver's crew and Buckler's crew," he exclaimed. "My God, go get them." The deciphered message, a clear, desperate plea for help, ignited a sense of urgency and relief. It galvanized Allied intelligence into action. The OSS team's initial infiltration into Yugoslavia had been fraught with peril. It was a stark reminder of the dangers awaiting them. Jibilian, Popovich, and Ferish had been forced to abandon their intelligence mission. They were under a hail of German Messerschmitts and Stuka dive bombers. They endured 5 harrowing days and nights fleeing through waist-deep snow. Their summer khakis froze and thawed to their bodies. They had learned the hard lessons of survival. They ran for their lives. They narrowly escaped a deadly firefight at a German bridge checkpoint. This earlier ordeal, a small-scale rehearsal for what was to come, underscored the profound risks. It showed the risks of operating behind enemy lines. Now, as Musolin, Rajakic, and Jibilian prepared for Operation Halyard, they discovered something. The scope of their mission had escalated dramatically. Instead of the anticipated 150 airmen, they were greeted by no fewer than 250 American airmen. More were arriving daily. It was a staggering number that dwarfed any previous rescue attempt. The Serbian Chetniks and villagers, under Mihailovich's unwavering command, offered these hundreds of airmen crucial safe haven, food, and security. They risked severe German retaliation. Their commitment was absolute. It was a profound act of defiance against Hitler's draconian order. 100 Serbs shot for every German soldier killed, the order stated, 50 for every wounded. The village of Prenjane transformed into a clandestine refuge. It was a testament to the deep bond forged between Americans and Serbs. Airmen were dispersed throughout peasant farmhouses. They often slept with animals, so their hosts could offer them beds. They were always ready to sprint into the woods or bury themselves in a haystack. This was at the first hint of German patrols. Food was scarce. Meager rations of simple whole-grain bread, cheese, milk, and root vegetables were all they had. But it was shared without hesitation. The immense logistical challenge of hiding and feeding such a large, constantly growing group in a remote occupied territory was a monumental undertaking. It was sustained by a quiet, unwavering humanitarianism that defied the brutal realities of war. The only way out was up. Ground evacuation was too dangerous, especially for the sick and injured. The decision was made. They would build an improvised airstrip. It was a testament to collective ingenuity and sheer grit. The chosen location was a small, narrow plateau. It was approximately 50 yards wide and nearly 700 yards long. It was a pilot's worst nightmare, yet their only hope. Musolin warned, if the Germans find out about this and attack, they're going to bring superior firepower and overwhelm the Chetniks. He added, all these airmen, especially the sick and injured, will never make it. 250 airmen, joined by 300 Serbian villagers and Chetnik soldiers, worked tirelessly. With bare, often bloodied hands, they used only occasional hoes, pitchforks, and ox carts. They used stones and soil from streams. They extended the runway, aiming for an additional 75 yards. This arduous task, a war fought against nature itself, was undertaken with grim determination. The airmen compared the danger to the Ploesti bomb runs. Every moment was a race against time and discovery. One terrifying moment during construction seared itself into memory. The roar of a Stuka dive bomber, followed by the distinctive thrum of 2 Ju-52 Junkers, suddenly shattered the mountain quiet. A collective gasp rippled through the hiding airmen and villagers, German planes. They were heading straight for the rudimentary strip. It was a raw, exposed scar on the landscape. Panic seized the men. They scurried like field mice from an approaching hawk. They dove into the surrounding woods, praying for invisibility. But the airstrip itself, that damning evidence, remained exposed. Just as discovery seemed imminent, a miracle of the mundane unfolded. A herd of cows, oblivious to the unfolding drama, ambled onto the field. Their slow, deliberate movements provided an impromptu cow camouflage that defied belief. This preserved operational security at a critical juncture. It created a moment of high tension that would be recounted for decades. On the night of August 9th, the daring rescue flights of Operation Halyard began. The improvised flare pots cast an eerie, fiery orange glow on the death trap airstrip. Hundreds of airmen and villagers watched. Their anxiety was palpable. The drone of a plane grew into a roar. The first C-47 approached. Its engines changed pitch. Wheels thumped the ground, sparking a brief, desperate hope. But the plane soon lifted off again. It left onlookers, including Airman Musgrove, in despair. Too short, he muttered. They can't do it. This will never work. The words echoed the fear in every heart. Then came the second C-47. It was a death-defying feat of piloting. It slammed its wheels onto the ground at a steep angle. It executed a hard landing that brought renewed jubilation. Muselin, watching, felt a surge of triumph. He compared it to Babe Ruth hitting a home run to win the series. A third plane landed successfully, but the fourth ran into a haystack. Witnessing the extreme peril of the improvised strip, Muselin made the critical decision. "Tell Bari we're not doing any more night landings," he told Jibilian, his voice firm. "Let's try again at dawn." The risks were simply too great. 4 planes had managed to take off, carrying 72 men, mostly wounded. They shared emotional goodbyes. The Serbs offered hearty bear hugs and kisses. They draped garlands of flowers around their necks. Airmen, some shoving bare feet into canvas bags, gave their boots, jackets, and shirts to their protectors. They received heartfelt "thank you, thank you, thank you" in return. Then they disappeared into the darkness. The remaining airmen and villagers huddled in the woods. They shivered in the cold, fearing German investigation. Then, at 9 a.m., the sky transformed. A loud rumble grew into a symphony of American power. 647s appeared. But this time, they were not alone. Approximately 30 P-51 Mustangs and P-38 Lightnings swarmed the morning's blue sky. It was a buzzing cloud of American spirit. The fighters wagged their wings in salute. They strafed German encampments. It signaled the cavalry coming in to save the day. It was the core forgotten 500 scene. It marked a dramatic shift to a more secure and efficient daylight rescue phase. It was protected by air superiority. The C-47s descended at treetop level. Some pilots performed dramatic ground loop, maneuvers to brake on the short strip. Villagers rushed to push a C-47 mired in soft ground. It was a powerful image of collective effort. Multiple waves of planes arrived, rescuing hundreds more. By the end of Operation Halyard, a total of 512 Allied airmen had been successfully rescued from enemy territory. This included 432 Americans. No lives were lost during the operations. It was a testament to courage, ingenuity, and profound Serbian sacrifice. Yet, even in this moment of triumph, political sensitivities loomed. Muselin, grateful for the Serbs' aid and witnessing their destitution, made a controversial decision. He evacuated 2 sick Serbian civilians. It was a compassionate act, but it was immediately deemed a grave indiscretion by army leaders in Bari. They were visibly displeased to see the Serbs step off the plane with the rescued airmen. This act of defiance by Muselin, born of principle, highlighted the deep political fault lines. These would ultimately overshadow the entire mission. The dust of Operation Halyard had barely settled on the makeshift airstrip at Pranjane. The cheers of rescued airmen still echoed in the rugged mountains. Then the cold hand of geopolitics began its work. The heroic efforts on the ground, the profound sacrifices of Serbian villagers and Chetnik fighters directly contradicted the carefully constructed narrative of Allied headquarters. Mihailovich's demonstrated loyalty and capability in saving hundreds of American lives should have been a triumph, yet it was swiftly buried beneath a deliberate web of conspiracy, lies, and cover-up. The post-war alignment, driven by the pragmatic and ultimately flawed desire to appease Stalin, cemented Josip Broz Tito's communist regime. It became the legitimate power in Yugoslavia. It marginalized Mihailovich and his undeniable contributions. For decades, the true story of the forgotten 500 was suppressed. It was a denial of credit to the very Serbs who had risked everything. It was a historical wound that would fester. The declassification of secret wartime signals in 1997 finally exposed the full extent of the political betrayals. As Tito's partisans, backed by the Red Army, consolidated their grip on Yugoslavia, the hunt for Mihailovich intensified. He was the last, formidable obstacle to absolute communist control. He was a symbol of royalist resistance that had to be crushed. For 17 months after the last American officers left Yugoslavia, in December of 1944, Mihailovich evaded capture. He was a ghost in his own mountains. Weakened by typhus, he was carried on a stretcher by his loyal Chetnik soldiers from village to village. He was sustained by the veneration of local peasants who brought him eggs and apples. Friends in Switzerland urged him to flee, to seek exile and safety. But Mihailovich refused. He chose a path of voluntary martyrdom. It was an unwavering commitment to his people and his land. His capture was finally reported by the Washington Post on March 25, 1946. The headline read, Mihailovich under arrest. Beleda says it accused him of traitorous collaboration with the Germans. This ignited a firestorm of outrage among those he had saved. News of Mihailovich's arrest galvanized the rescued American airmen. They remembered the soft-spoken general. They remembered his quiet dignity. They remembered the profound risks taken on their behalf. They were determined to speak truth to power. They wanted to prevent the man who saved their lives from being branded a traitor. On March 31, 1946, an article by Mike Fellman appeared in the New York Journal American. It detailed his experiences. This prompted over 300 airmen to contact him. They quickly formed the National Committee for Defense of Draza Mihailovich and the Serbian people. They adopted a powerful, defiant slogan. He saved our lives, it declared. Now we'll save his. Robert Wilson, one of the rescued, voiced the collective sentiment. Even if they couldn't save him, they wanted Mihailovich to know he was remembered and appreciated for his risks. The mission to save Mihailovich took flight on April 28, 1946. It was a cinematic spectacle, designed to capture national attention. A DC-3 plane, its mission boldly stenciled on its side, carried sharply dressed young airmen in suits and fedoras to Washington, D.C. They were not just veterans, they were witnesses. 2,000 cheering supporters waving signs greeted them. It was a testament to the emotional resonance of their cause. Fellman, looking out at the crowd, reflected on the soft-spoken, scholarly man who saved us from the shadow behind the boulder or tree. He felt the same shadow now hovering over him. In Washington, the airmen met with Acting Secretary of State Dean Acheson. Acheson assured them the U.S. government would appeal for a fair trial. President Truman, however, declined to meet with their committee. The State Department sent a letter to Tito. It offered the airmen's first-hand proofs and testimony. The reply was a chilling, curt rejection. Mihailovich's crimes, Tito declared, were too terrible to permit the question of his innocence to be raised. This confirmed the trial was a foregone conclusion. Former OSS agent Eli Popovich lamented, "We have sold Mihailovich down the river to Tito." Nick Lalich, another rescued airman, protested an inaccurate Legion of Merit citation. It placed him with Tito's partisans instead of Mihailovich. He vowed to do all he could to get Mihailovich a decent break. The trial of General Draza Mihailovich began on June 10, 1946, in Belgrade. It was a chilling communist dog and pony show. It was designed for political revenge and propaganda. It was orchestrated by Tito, likely with Marshal Stalin's indirect direction. The makeshift courtroom, rigged with glaring floodlights, hosted over 1,000 spectators and 100 journalists. It transformed justice into theatre. Mihailovich, weary and weak from confinement and perhaps torture, entered carefully. His eyesight was nearly to the point of blindness. He was a shadow of the fierce guerrilla leader. The indictment, a 600-page report, accused him of various crimes. These included meeting with an American officer and the chief of the Nazi military command in August of 1944. These meetings, in some instances, had been organized by American High Command to discuss surrender terms. Crucially, the indictment condemned Mihailovich for fighting Tito's partisans. It framed resistance to communism as treason per se. Prominent American attorney Morris L. Ernst, his offer was rejected. But his offer was rejected. Scholar David Martin would later claim that Churchill had been taken in by Tito. It was a stark acknowledgement of the West's misjudgment. On July 15, 1946, Mihailovich was found guilty of all charges. The president of the court, in his closing comments, declared the verdict a faithful interpreter of the national feeling for justice and equity. It stigmatized treason against the fatherland and upheld freedom-loving traditions. 2 days later, on July 17, 1946, the bearded 50-year-old Chetnik leader was executed by a firing squad at dawn. His last words, imbued with the weight of history and personal tragedy, echoed through the mountains he loved. "I strove for much," he said. "I undertook much. But the gales of the world have carried away both me and my work." The Washington Post reported his execution the next day. But within days, Mihailovich faded from headlines. He became, as many felt, one of the first casualties of the Cold War. Rescued airmen like Tony Orsini wept at the news. They expressed profound sorrow and anger, feeling abandoned by the free world. Richard Feldman persistently wrote articles about his upset. Yet, within 2 years, Mihailovich and the airmen were largely forgotten by the public. It left a stain on the honor of all freedom-loving countries. The Washington Post editorial criticized the US and British governments for abandoning Mihailovich, but his case would become a symbol of betrayal and the suppression of historical truth in the face of ideological dominance. It highlighted how the victors write history. It transformed a rescuer and ally into a perceived traitor. His execution cemented Tito's control over Yugoslavia. It was an early and brutal victory for the communist bloc. The immediate aftermath of Operation Halyard was not marked by celebration. Instead, there was a chilling silence. The triumph of saving hundreds of American lives was deliberately buried. It was deemed politically inconvenient in the shifting sands of post-war geopolitics. A distorted historical narrative took root. It was carefully crafted to favor the communist agenda of Josip Broz Tito. It painted General Draza Mihailovich as a collaborator rather than the loyal ally he had proven to be. The story of the ally betrayed became a bitter symbol of historical truth suppressed. It was a profound injustice left to fester for decades beneath the weight of ideological dominance. Yet truth, though suppressed, could not be permanently extinguished. The first, albeit secret, acknowledgement came in 1948. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, recognizing the profound injustice, strongly urged President Harry Truman to correct the record. Truman, swayed by the moral imperative, posthumously awarded Mihailovich the Legion of Merit. It was a medal of violet, blue, green, and gold. It was a significant gesture, implicitly acknowledging the U.S. government's error. But the State Department, ever cautious, feared repercussions. Cables dated April 1st and April 21st, 1948, explicitly directed, "No steps will be taken at this time to give publicity to this award." This decision was born of a desire to maintain fragile post-war relations with Yugoslavia. It also sought to protect American prestige during Italy's pre-election period. It rendered a grand gesture half-hearted by timidity. The medal, a symbol of honor, remained hidden for decades. It was locked away with the truth it represented. Years passed. In 1967, Congressman Edward J. Dowinski intervened. He succeeded in making the Legion of Merit citation public. However, the medal itself still could not be formally presented. Then, in 1979, Ronald Reagan, a rising voice on the world stage, publicly paid his respects to Mihailovich. He declared that both freedom and honor suffer when firm commitments become sacrificed to false hopes of appeasing aggressors by abandoning friends. His words were a direct criticism of the confused and senseless policies. These had sacrificed allies for political expediency. They resonated deeply with those who knew the truth. Finally, in 1997, decades after the events, British wartime reports were declassified. They unequivocally revealed the extent of Soviet manipulation. They showed the insidious role of James Klugman in systematically discrediting Mihailovich. They also revealed his role in shifting Allied support to Tito. For the rescued airmen and their families, who had fought tirelessly for recognition, these slow, painful revelations were a testament. They showed the enduring power of individual conscience and the relentless pursuit of historical justice. The long-due acknowledgement finally arrived on May 9, 2005. Mihailovich's daughter, Gordana Mihailovich, stood before a contingent of aging, rescued airmen and OSA's agents. These included Arthur Jibilian and George Vujnovich. Her hands, nervous and excited, trembled as she accepted the violet, blue, green, and gold medal. Tears streamed down her face. They were mirrored by the raw emotion visible in the eyes of the veterans who had lived the story. They remembered the women and villagers who had risked everything. They remembered the quiet dignity of the general who had saved them. Yet, even this moment of vindication was not entirely free of the old shadows. The ceremony itself was changed to a private affair at the last minute. This reinforced Jibilian's weary frustration. "There's still a conspiracy to keep this story from being told," he stated. It was a poignant reminder of the dangers of international expediency. It showed the sacrifice of allies for political gain. It was a cautionary tale that echoed through the decades. The enduring legacy of Operation Halyard, however, could not be contained by political maneuvering. The rescue of 512 Allied airmen, predominantly Americans, directly impacted countless families. It undeniably contributed to the war effort. It demonstrated the nascent OS's formidable capabilities in unconventional warfare and intelligence gathering. It pioneered methods that would shape future agencies. More profoundly, it forged an unbreakable bond between American airmen and the Serbian people. Claire Musgrove's grandson, years later, would articulate this legacy with simple power. "If not for Mihailovich and Operation Halyard," he said, "he never would have been born." Robert Wilson, returning to Yugoslavia, found that while official memory in America might be fleeting, the warmth of the villagers who remembered the airmen was unwavering. In 1995, at the 50th anniversary of VE Day in Ravna Gora, 50,000 Serbian people gathered. They cheered returning veterans. It was a powerful demonstration of enduring local recognition. Operation Halyard remains a tragic historical legacy. It is an indelible stain of abandoning a loyal ally to a communist regime. It had long-term implications for the Cold War and the tumultuous history of the Balkans, but it is also a testament to human courage, unwavering loyalty, and the ultimate triumph for the truth that refused to stay buried.